will call on our elder statesman, Pa-Fru Kimbang, to do us the honors of introducing our special guest speaker for today. Pa-Fru, if you're there, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, Ambazonian of good faith. I've been given an honor to introduce someone who is a fighter in our struggle, who has become a very good friend, and without taking much time, I also give my honor to our little granddaughter who was sacrificed for our cause. I hope that is a tipping point for our struggle. The person I am about to introduce needs no introduction, but I have to do it. He is no one else but Professor Patrice Nganang. Is currently a writer, professor, and head of Department of Africana Studies at Stony Brook University, New York. He is also an author of several novels, essays, and monographs. He was arrested and jailed in a maximum jail for 21 days by the Cameroonian government for touring the North, West, and the Southwest region of Ambazonia in 2017 and expelled from La République. He is currently in exile. So it is my distinguished honor to introduce Professor Patrice Nganang, whom you all know was in Lowell and marched on the streets holding hands with the mayor of Lowell and the chief of police in Lowell to demonstrate for the liberation of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia. Professor Patrice Nganang, please.
Yes, thank you very much for, I think, things happen, and at the same time, one needs to have the intelligence to be able to talk about them in such a way that one will not be ashamed 1 or 2 or 10 years after the event. And I vividly remember when I came to Massachusetts and when we were walking on the street, on the streets, you know, coming from my background, which is Francophone. You know, you probably don't read the newspapers or follow the media, the Francophone media. It was quite a shock. and so people were saying it was a bad idea that I was arrested because I've been radicalized. And I still think about it sometimes, and I wonder what can be as more radical than to stand for our own daughter who was murdered the way Carolina was. What can be more radical than what our mother, her grandmother did when she undressed, to give her the honor that even the soldiers of Cameroon don't have? What can be more radical than to do what the woman did, who took the first stone and threw at the soldier, at the gendarme, transforming the long history of our fears into a history of courage? I mean, honestly, what can be more radical than the policeman who was a bystander of the lynching of his colleague and who willingly decided not to shoot and not to increase the number of dead people that day? You know, those are small signs of dignity and of humanity that are presented as radical. And yet they are radical because they happen in a context where we've basically lost our sense of humanity. And so thinking, just to come back to our meeting there in Lowell, you remember you gave me a medal. And I have it here. You know, I will have taken my computer, I've showed it here. It is one of the proudest medals I've ever had.
The state gave you a medal, not me.
No, you. And Ambazonians of Massachusetts gave me a medal. It's here. And the state gave me a degree as well. And so, and after having walked through the streets of Lowell, I was involved in a campaign during the year, and I saw what it means to actually work for nothing. So you can see that my gratitude is close to tears because I'm so happy to be here. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again, and thank you for allowing me really to be part of the family here. And I always felt that way. Maybe you don't know, when I finished my PhD in 1998, that's quite a long time now, I wanted to go back to Cameroon, but to teach in Buea. So I landed in Buea in 1999, and I went to the university on campus. There was everywhere signs. I always regret it. I will regret it until I die. There were signs everywhere. No pigeon allowed here. No pigeon allowed here. So I'm sure you know those signs. But it shocked me a lot. And I'm mentioning it because, of course, from all the videos we get, you know yourself that pidgin is now the national language of Ambazonia. So, and it's going to stay that way. That's how a national language is decided upon. It's not through vote. It is through the people suffering and sacrifices that the language becomes national, because they own it. And the university is going to teach it as well, the university where it was banned, you see. So it is a tremendous evolution, I think. And I'm thinking of my friend, Peter Vakunta, who has dedicated his life to have a grammar of pidgin, all those kinds of things. He teaches here in the US. So thank you very much for having me. In terms of technicality, I simply have two maps I would like to show. So if it is possible to have my screen for a brief moment. Do you have the map now?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So I think one or two things. The first, before I even talk about this map, who already say that I am a teacher by profession. So it means, and I'm a writer. Actually, my calling is being a writer. And I always understood writing as something that you share. It means your thoughts are in your mind, and writing is that you articulate it for somebody else to understand them. And you have characters to make sure that somebody who actually cannot understand concepts can understand what is happening through a story. So the old thing that our parents, grandparents used to do, meaning to tell a story for you to understand a moral principle. So that is writing for me. The bottom line being that you break it down. So instead of saying, for instance, the theory of relativity is this and that, you have two characters, one sitting in one train, another one sitting in another one. And people will understand what it means to be in different trains. And they will get the theory without having the physical or mathematical details of it. So you broke it down. That is the way I look at a conflict. That's the way I look at people's relationships. That is the way I look at what is happening in the Southwest and Outwest, which is to say that I break it down for me, myself to understand, and for people to understand. And the easiest way to break something down is certainly to have a map. But also, one way is to have simple questions, very simple questions. This is a map you all know, but the thing is that most Francophone Cameroonians do not know this map. Most Francophone Cameroonians do not know where those cities are located. In other words, we are bombarded every single day with videos, etc., since now 4 years. But most people cannot locate those videos on the map. So therefore, it is very difficult to answer the question, where is the fighting happening? So to have a certain rationale of the fighting, and yet if you don't have a rationale of the fighting, you will not understand what is going on, because you will simply think it is chaotic. It is people killing each other, as one says here in the US, black on black crime, or black people are killing each other. It's another civil war, etc., etc. So let's have peace. Let us simply forget it. It is brutal, chaotic. I'm not going to repeat it very often, but you know what I'm talking about. It is essential for somebody to have a rationale of what is happening, for it to make sense, for people to understand that what is happening is indeed a struggle for the liberation of a people. And when you say a people, you need to say that a people is connected to a land. And what is that land? Before you even get to history, and that is another matter. So what is that land? In other words, what is the location of the places where the fighting is happening? So why is it, for instance, that people still talk about schools, but only show pictures of Buea or sometimes Bamenda? So why is it that when people talk about schools, kids going to school, for instance, Caroline, she was going to school. Exactly, she was going to school, but she was going to school in Bamenda. So the question is, in Buea, Moliko, if you want, right? So now, can she go to school, let's say, if it was in Bali? So people will have to understand the distinction between Bali and Moliko, for instance. The fact that Moliko is very close to Douala, and that it is basically city area. So in other words, a visual representation of the struggle is essential. And that's why I have this map for people somehow, mostly Francophones, but people in general, to understand what I call the distinction between bush war and city war. In other words, the first thing that I looked at, because I myself came to Ambazonia, to the Northwest and Southwest very late in my life. So I came there for the first time, I just say it, in 1999. So before I'd never been there. And so I traveled around because I wanted to see, and also my wife being English speaking, I wanted her to see a place where people speak English. So we traveled around for us to see that, everything. So the first thing, of course, is that the major cities are very close to the Francophone part. So when you look at Bamenda, you look at Buea, they're actually enclaves of Francophone land. So it is a couple of kilometers only. So it means from that starting point, it's very easy to give an illusion of continuity, of peace, of a government that's running, etc. You can easily concoct that story. And, because Bamenda is going to have people and Buea is going to have people, etc. But now if you start talking about Mundemba, if you start talking about, etc., Akwaya, so you realize that you are moving into land, into bush, into villages. And that is where the war happens. So if one understands it, one understands that there is a certain dynamic, that the relation between the bush, between the village and the city is essential, that the relation between the war in the village and the war in the city is essential, that the militarization of the villages it is what gives courage to the city, and even it gives an idea of why it is that Buea and Bamenda are still somehow in a situation of peace. When the villages are emptied, when the villages are in situations of war, when the villages are in basically in uninhabitable. So where is the fighting happening is important for us to underline. And when you look at it, you also maybe tactically, also strategically even understand why it should give hope. Because it is a defensive position there. The villages are there to actually, they are the backbone of everything, really, even militarily. You automatically realize that the location of that Ambazonia is really blessed to have, villages as the backyard of the cities, that the villages are so well located that it is basically impossible to get at them. Of course, one can say Nigeria is there, is the proper backyard, but the villages are really the real backyard. So when you look at it that way, you realize that that the vision of victory is possible because it is rooted in the very location of the place where the war is happening. So it is not a fantastic presentation of the situation, but it is simply a factual analysis of how things are being played out. So then you realize that in 1 or 2 years, it was easy and very possible and really manageable to have the cities, I wanted to say strangulated, but to have the role of Ambazonia in a situation of war. So, and it is a beautiful description, I think, of what is and what is possible. And at least from my standpoint, from what I see from outside, I see the story of back then during the 70s, and also Bush War has a very specific history that will bring us back to people like Museveni, Kagame, etc. Even though in this specific case, you don't have a central command. But the concept is still there. You know, without a central command, you still have, you know, the concept of a bush war. So that is the first thing I wanted to mention. The second is, for those who follow my page, you may have noticed that from the very beginning, I insisted on the ethnic quality of the conflict. I say quality. Quality is a positive term because one cannot at the same time want to have a defense of African cultures, etc., and look down on our own ethnicity. So it is a contradiction I cannot live with. So therefore, I say equality. So, and now on the other hand, it is impossible to have a conflict, you know, be it particularly a civil war, without having it fall into an ethnic, you know, battle. So you cannot avoid it because, you know, the backbone of a civil war is the population, is, you know, anthropology, you know, bush war is the bush, so it's the village if you want. So the village has the quality of having kept our traditions alive. So it means it is from that backbone that any substantial battle can be waged, any engagement can be fought, and anything of substance can be mobilized. It is really from our ethnic background that such a thing is possible. So at the very beginning, it was very outrageous because from my standpoint, it wasn't really. But from the standpoint of Cameroonians, of Francophone Cameroonians, it was a shock. The reason being that you know, Francophone Cameroonians have inherited a vision of the state that comes from France, where you have a conception that is not communal, so you don't talk of communities. In France, they don't even accept that people are Black. So in the constitution or in your ID, things like that, you are not supposed to mention your own ethnicity, things like that. So in any case, from the standpoint of the community, it was a shock. So I was attacked quite often. People talked of genocide, etc., etc. I don't know if you follow. If you did not, it is not important. But in any case, for me, it was tactically necessary to clearly define who are the fighting or the warring parties. In other words, to answer the question, who is fighting? And I actually remember the first talk I had in Massachusetts, where I started that analysis somehow. It wasn't very much fleshed out, but I needed, I think, 3 years to have a clarity of what is going on. It may have shocked lots of people, but not me, that the soldiers who were engaged in Ambazonia in the Northwest and Southwest from the very beginning were all Francophones, French speaking. So of course, it did not shock me because my arrest was quite early. So when I was arrested, I knew the people who kept me, who even cooked my food, etc. All of them were all Francophone, were all from one tribe. They were all Bulu, so clearly set, and they spoke with each other in one mother tongue, in their mother tongue as well. So as such, I knew myself that I was the captive of a tribe, and that I could do nothing without that tribe actually willing, that I could do that. So maybe from that standpoint, when I was released, I remembered my first interview already in January 2018. I said that, and people were outraged because I had a huge sympathy, and that is the first moment when I had a split in people who were supporting me, particularly amongst the Francophones. So where one group said you cannot speak like that, that interview even was censored, and and finally, I needed to have a second thought. But then people came and I discussed, etc. And I even know, I came to the point of saying, no, that is exactly the face of the enemy. That is the face of the enemy, because the enemy doesn't have any sympathy. The enemy has a certain sense of security, knows that he is kept inside the shadow of the state. He's covered by a certain ideology of the state, and he can actually act in total impunity, knowing that people will not even listen to you if you say that this is the enemy. In other words, If a woman is raped, people are firstly going to listen to the man and say, okay, why was she well dressed, etc. They will not listen to her in the first place. So that is what happens in general in front of a victim. So that is a situation in which I was somehow. And so I started observing things that were random during the first year of the conflict. I was arrested 1 year after it all started. So during the first year of the conflict, I was simply noticing. I was noticing that what is happening here, that all the soldiers who are actually committing all those acts speak French. And I cannot forget that the Cameroonian army is bilingual. So Cameroon is, I don't need to insist on that. It's supposed to have a national army, and that national army is supposed to be bilingual. So if then the state wanted to have peace, they will likely do something like the one that like Americans do. So they will send English-speaking soldiers to Ambazonia to cool off people. So my first shock was that they actually went the other way. They did not send English-speaking soldier in 2016 to fraternize, to talk to people, to say, hey, calm down, calm down, it's not a big deal. No, they sent Francophone soldiers in the first place. So it was to crack down. And it increased, from 2017 to 2020, it was clear to anybody, you just have to look at the videos, you just have to look at, to listen to audios, you simply have to, we are talking about thousands of, material here. It's 90% Francophone. That is a shock to, and I think it should be a shock to anybody. But when you look at the history of colonial, conflicts in Africa in general, the colonial army proceeded exactly that way. I'm not going to go in tactical maneuvers, etc. I'm simply going to talk about the sociology of the soldiers. For instance, in Francophone Cameroon, when Cameroon was, French Cameroon, the soldiers were invested in fighting UPC, etc. They, in general, came from the Congo, from Dahomey, from Chad, mostly from Chad. So they did not have any possibility of fraternizing with the population because they came to crack down. So that is the basic assumption. And it runs down until, from the French, from 1916 until, 1960, to the German before, when you take the Askari, before it was also the same thing. The Askari did not come from, Cameroon. They came from other German colonies and from Togo specifically, and they came there to come to crack down on Cameroonians. It is a colonial tactic. So it is shared by all colonial powers. In general, they will not enlist people from the place where they are having a conflict. So it answers, the question, who is actually fighting? So it is obvious from the very beginning. Biya said he's fighting against, I would say, Anglophones. He pinpointed what he calls, and is still called, secessionists, separatists, etc. But in general, in the choosing of his soldiers, it is clear that he was fighting against Anglophones, because in the body of his army, you did not have, English-speaking people. I'm talking about the body of the army that's invested in the field. So going from there, it is equally important to understand who is the other side, because the war is between two parties. So who are the Francophones, fighting? It is clear that, looking at the organization of, the battalions, etc., you can ask the question, is it made mostly of people from the north? Hausas, for instance, were invested in the war during the 60s in the West. They were called Mafi back then, because they would not speak French easily, and they mostly came from the Sara Giziga tribe. So they came really from the extreme north. So, and they were invested in Bamileke land. As such, they were dark, they had face marks, and so in our own mother tongue, they are really known to, to be totally brutal and to have face masks and to not speak French. So that's the 60s. So the same tactics is used here. And so you can exclude those northerners because you don't see them invested in Ambazonia. You can clearly, account that you have a cup of Bamileke, you have a cup of Bassa, but mostly you have people from the south, from the center and from the east. The Bulu, as I would say. And the reason is also tactical. It is when you look at the language organization of what is called Cameroon, it is a part of Cameroon in general where people are not bilingual or will tend not to be bilingual, because the Northerners, one part of the North was actually, would have been a part of Amazonia, because it was West Cameroon and it went to Nigeria. So in other words, the Northerners, they tend to speak Pidgin as well. So they are quite bilingual because they shift between Nigeria, etc. So they are very close to Ambazonia in their history. The Bamileke anyway, as you well know, you have a large, graphic, population in Ambazonia. So therefore you have a circulation of population between the two groups. And, the Bamums, certainly the Sawa, you don't even need to argue about it. You have a strong Sawa population in the Southwest, and you also have one in the littoral, regions. But, the social group that is totally Francophone, that will actually be only Francophone, the Bulu. So looking at the history of, colonial military warfare, you understand that they are the ones who are the most foreign to the region of investment. And as such, they are also the ones who are likely to commit atrocities you will have never seen, kill a baby, burn villages, because they have no attachment to the region. They simply will have no feeling because they don't understand. And a human, they don't see any connection between themselves and the population, they have in front of them. And that is a colonial, disposition, military disposition. I did publish a couple of books on, on those things. I'm not going to, put, those files here, but understand that it is a totally colonial, disposition of military warfare. So, the consequence of that disposition is atrocities like, the one against, Carolina, or the burning of villages, the torching of grandmothers, of grandfathers, the killing, random killing, shooting in houses, those kinds of things. They are the continuity of a colonial, of a colonial disposition. So I simply had two questions for today. The first was, where is the fighting happening? And as such, I wanted to establish a distinction between, on the one hand, bush war, and on the other hand, city war. So those two. And I also wanted to, to ask the question, who are the fighting, parties? And so I wanted to have that clarity somehow in our mind, or at least in mind. And, because those two questions also help us understand why the brutality of the military is a systematic issue, and why it actually cannot change, why it can only change with the independence of Amazonia. So I'm not expecting the military to change, because tactically or even strategically, they are in the trap of colonial history. And as such, the only exit option that one has from such a trap, the only option that is there, that could restore the dignity of, both people, of both parties, is really independence. And then after that, one can see further, one can look further, one can elaborate a certain sense of community, but not before. So that is somehow what I wanted to have on the table. I felt I can't put on the table. And I see one, Alam, having a hand raised. I'm happy to answer your question.
Alam, go ahead with your question.
Okay, Professor Patrice Nganang, so thank you so much. Oh, by the way, Comrade Actor, your voice seems to be low. I don't know if it's just me, but your voice was really, really considerably low. And I want to see if you can increase your volume. Prof, thank you so much for coming to us today. I mean, your work speaks volumes. It precedes you pretty much for the most part. I think my question, being as though you are very knowledgeable and understanding of what it is that we're going through, how we got here, and where we're heading to. My question is it worth our while? And if it is, how do we do it? What can we do to further educate what you will call French Cameroon? Of course, you have again, the struggle is not against it's against a system, a tyranny system that's in that particular location. how do we educate, let's say, Francophones in general to understand really what the Southern Cameroon issue is? Because up to now, as you will notice, in all the other 8 regions of Cameroon, or Republic Cameroon, nothing has been done in terms of a major, I would like to say, outcry or outreach as to what is going on. Now, yes, I don't want to believe that majority of Francophones are oblivious to the issue, or they don't care, right? So is it something that we are missing as Southern Cameroonians in terms of putting our case before them to understand what is going on, or is it a deliberate act upon Francophones that they just don't care what is going on in those 2 regions? Otherwise, why hasn't there been anything in Garoua, Maroua, in Bafoussam, Douala, Yaoundé? Nothing as in terms of a protest, nothing major with regards to the problem. What are we missing? That's my question.
All right. Thanks, Alan. We have another hand up. That is Chia John. Comrade Chia John, go ahead.
Good evening, Prof. Ghana. It's to have you. I follow you with keen attention on Facebook.
Thank you.
And in one of your hearings in Yaoundé back when you were arrested in Cameroon, I was actually there, and I applaud you for your stance. That stands against a majority of people who feel that you are part of them and should follow a line. I have followed your analysis with critical attention, and I really think that as a teacher, you have actually presented it in a way that even most of us, the Anglophones, in quotes, which I prefer to call Southern Cameroonians, don't actually get to give that academic analysis. My interest is, it has been 4 years now that the war is very active. You have tried to pin it to a particular tribe. And I think from your analysis, it is very logical for somebody to pull that same conclusion as you have done. I want to believe that Cameroonians as individuals don't have a problem as between individuals. English Cameroonians don't have problems with French Cameroonians as individuals. But when it comes to the political conceptions of these big political divides of Cameroon, no matter how one side tries to educate the other, there is still that lingering understanding that each side is being defensive. My interest is, it has been 4 years. What is the international community doing?
So I think you've taken 3 questions so far. Let us squeeze in 2 more, Prof, and then you would answer them in a series. Let's take Jojo, and then we'll come to IBM. Jojo, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Nganang. Thank you very much. My question is, what's your motivation and what's your interest in doing this, even at the detriment of your relationship with your fellow compatriots? Because I've been following you like the others, you've been so objective and you see it as a pace. What's motivating you? Thank you.
Thank you for that very direct question. So IBM, ask your question, then we'll let Prof answer the question so far.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Professor Nganang, first of all, I would like to thank you for coming to speak to us today. I am a huge fan. My wife and I follow you religiously. And I would like also to say congratulations on your new book. So my question is pretty simple and direct about France. You know, we can all see that the war is becoming difficult on La République du Cameroun, and they are actually very soon going to be defeated. Is it going to be a time when you think we'll see the French forces coming to help La République? Do you think that will ever happen?
Okay, I think it's easier for me to start with Jojo, because it is quite direct question there. What is my motivation? What's my interest? My interest, I have no interest really. I think I would say that interest is not part of my own vocabulary, because I tend to move without any interest. I don't even, because interest is quite direct there, like money or position, etc. So I will say that that I have no interest. And from that point of view, I will say I work, you know, I invest myself in the cases that where I'm invested in, be it for the freedom of one person or of a group. Since you know, it all started, I would say, in my specific case in 2005, when students were arrested. I started being involved in their defense, in working for them to be free. 2008, I had all those youngsters who were arrested. I was so involved in battling for them, particularly Joe La Conscience, and he was freed. The first really to be freed on May the 20th, 19th, 2008. And then going forward until now, I've been, you know, half my life, if not more of it, is dedicated to fighting for, you know, for causes where many of my friends will say they are lost at the very beginning, but at the end, we tend to win. So I will say I have no interest, but simply the conviction that each time humanity is trampled upon, I feel called to do something. And I simply cannot sleep until I've done something. You know, it sounds quite large or grand, but it is quite simple in my case, really. I don't think that much about it, about interest or my motivation. I simply do it. So regarding, I'm going to come to what Alam asked. What can we do to educate French Cameroonian? The first thing is, you see, my presentation was based on two simple questions, and I think it is the way I proceed in general. It is how I tend to write. To break it down and to have simple questions and to have answers to those questions, like a child. You know, why is the sky blue? So then you have to find an answer to that. Why is it not raining today and it rained yesterday? So you have to find an answer to that very simple question. So if you take a very simple question, I think most Ambazonians, Southern Cameroonians, West Cameroonians evolved on all those issues. Even the issue of naming yourself, you evolved. Even the issue of federation, you evolved. Even the issue of independence, you evolved. Many of you, and you know that yourselves, were for independence only lately. And many were, you know, during their lifetime for a union of the world of Cameroon, and they came only very late to the realization that independence is the key. And if I go through my own conversation with all my friends, you know, it is clear that many actually even did not believe that independence was the key. So you had lots of issues, the killing, you had lots of issues about injustice, about marginalization, you had lots of issues about mistreatment, about lack of dignity, respect, etc. So you had a long list, a laundry list, but independence tended not to be on top of those. So now, flip the coin, look at a Francophone. Many Francophones will agree on marginalization is not good, injustice is not good, mistreatment, it's a lack of road, hospitals, etc. You will have a common agreement there. And most of them will not tell you that they are not for independence. And the reason being that many Ambazonians actually came very late to understand themselves even as Ambazonians. I actually remember talking to some of my friends who were, as we say, Anglophones, and they actually refused to be called Ambazonians. And I'm talking about people of good standing and who are in amongst, you know, the crowd sometimes here. And they will say, no, I'm not Ambazonian, I'm Southern Cameroonian. And I'm not Ambazonian, and it means a lot. So it essentially means that the clarity on independence is not there. And the moment it is there, that moment you'll have a new discussion. So in other words, if one says, what do you want? Very simple question. If the answer is, I want independence, you will see you have a different crowd than the crowd you expected. It may be smaller, but that crowd will be more dedicated to your goal. Phrased differently, when Representative Weber made his speech in 2016, he talked about those who want to break Cameroon. That is the sentence. I was in Paris, last week, and I talked to Francophones, and so they were all for Ambazonia, etc., etc. And then I said, okay, do you agree that we break Cameroon? All of them say, no, no, we don't want that. You see, so then you have lost them totally, but you've gained other friends. The hope, of course, that you have is, in terms of talking, is that you hope to have an amphitheater. But my own conviction is that to gain independence, you don't need to have an amphitheater full. You need to have a few people who are dedicated to the goal, and the rest is going to follow suit if you win. So the clarity of your goal is going to make you have friends. But if you are first in your goal, then you will not win Francophones at all. You need to know what we want is independence, full stop. So then later on, we'll see how it's going to work. It can work, it doesn't work, who knows, but that's not our business for now. Our children will take care of that. What our generation wants is independence. And if we agree on that, you'll have lots of friends. You'll have not the same friends you were hoping to have, but different ones. Regarding education, it's part of it. Regarding even the international community, it is part of it. But the good news I'll say is that in 4 years, we have seen France isolated. You've seen France becoming totally isolated in its corner. And that's a good news, because before, I always remember that France and the US, of course, are partners in crime. So as such, even if the US, condemns what is happening, it is still supporting France in other ways. But it still remains that France is isolated. And the second good news, I would say, I'm talking about the international community and what it can do, is that I'm convinced that Macron is going to lose the election. And many people will think that he will win, but I'm convinced he will lose. It means one will go back to the drawing board and have a new type of discussion. Now, is it possible that in the constellation of France having an election in April and May, that France will have an intervention in Cameroon? No. Is it possible that in the case of Central Africa, France has never intervened directly because Chad is the country that always does the dirty job? Now, is it possible that Chad, given that Idriss Déby just died and his son overtook the position he had and is struggling to actually stay in power, is it possible that Chad will intervene the way Chad did in Mali in 2013-14? Is it possible? My answer is no, it is not possible. The consequence is this, it's the good news. It is that the fighting you are seeing happening in Amazonia right now is the fighting that's going to happen. So the warring parties you have in front of you right now is the warring parties you are going to have for a while. The dry bone you are having there, it's a dry bone you are going to have for a while. It means the clarity of your enemy is essential there. So I'm not saying the Bulu people or the Francophones or the Bia people, if you want, having the help of France or having some type of military intervention, etc., in a year or two, because during this next year, France has an election. And Chad, who used to do the job, is also going to have an election. So it is not going to be that easy. The clarity of that situation is essential, therefore, to be able to have a military maneuver, to have a confrontation that will make sense. So I think I did answer the question about France, Macron, and intervention. Now, regarding what Southern Cameroonians can do in academia, I mean, in academia myself, there is a certain sense of there's something that one tends to underestimate. It is the moral dimension of a struggle. The moral dimension of a struggle, I will describe it this way. You see, the first pictures, the pictures of 2018 coming from Ambazonia, were pictures of people being hunted down on the street, being chased, people running away, the Cameroonian army coming, Bulu people coming, shooting around and people running. So it was a disarray. But then it changed, the dynamic changed because you had a psychological backbone that was built on the fact that, Amba soldiers came to rescue. So it sounds very little, but people need to have a moral fortitude. And academia does that. The job of scholarship, the job of research, strengthening the historical case, strengthening the legal case, strengthening the moral case. For instance, building file around genocide, the argument of genocide, building file, having somebody who actually maps out, like I did it, answering simple questions.
Ibo, vas-y, on chante.
Answering very simple questions, which means, for instance, who are the warring parties? Where is the fighting happening? Where is the front? How many people are killed? Let me give you an example. Until now, one is still stuck at 3,000 people killed. And you will be surprised, in 1 year, it will not change. You will have documents still saying that 3,000 people died. It is enough, certainly. It was 3,000 people killed were enough for Mali to go to the ICC. It was enough, but Cameroon is not at the ICC because Cameroon is not a member of the ICC. So that is the moral argument, the legal argument that scholarship can do. And that is something, it needs to be done, to have an archive of all those atrocities. I did it for a year or two, but then it blossomed. It was simply way too much. So one needs to invest on that, to have an archive where the date, the location, and the circumstance is clearly described, and if possible, to have the name of the people who committed those atrocities. Because at a certain moment, one will have to come back to that archive and establish the responsibility of the state and the responsibility of the military. So far, it has squeezed itself to the Bulu people, to the Bulu in the military. But then they will have to answer, because then they would like to shift the blame to somebody else. They will like to say, no, it's not us. But one has to pin them down on their crimes, and pin them down meaning where, when, in what circumstance. And that is where scholarship, Southern Cameroonian, scholarship is essential. And as we know, the voice of the victim is the moral case that you have. And that is the moral case you have to fight, even to give a legitimate answer to the reason why you picked up arms. And it is scholarship that does that.
Thank you, Prof. This is a very, very, very good, instructive discussion we're having today.
I wanted to push Patrice, Professor Nganang, a little bit on the question before I leave. And Patrice, I think, if I may indulge, the question about France, I think is not really answered. The war in Cameroon, as in the war of French African countries, is not really answered until you see the relationship between France and Cameroon, or France and its colonies. I would like you to also have to put this in context, because they are using the Bulus today. What if it turns out that the Hausas, or maybe the Northerners, take power tomorrow? What happens? So the argument you make in terms of the Bulus as the people who are not really bilingual, it's a good argument now, but that argument, it's an effect rather than a cause. The cause of all of this is the French machination in Africa. If you may, to see where our problem as Southern Cameroonians exist in the terms of a war of sovereignty, war where people talk about, the graphie or the camaraderie, or maybe the family, the commonness, the oneness of our people, so to speak, for some people. But the problem is, how can these two people even ever think about any coexistence with the French teleguiding the monster that is Yaoundé? So I would like to get that. But number two, and more important, as equally important, I'd like to hear from you, how many school of thoughts are there on the French, how the different school of thoughts are viewing this war from La République perspective, from our Francophone brothers' perspective. Yes, you've mentioned one camp, which is talking about our independence, yet they don't want us to separate. There is also the camp.
Peu importe nos différences.
Is there also a camp?
Et nos chemins d'enfance, si avec toi je danse.
There is a lot that should be kicked out, man. So yeah, there is also the camp that is because of the war economy, and that has actually now gone, which doesn't actually even want to see this war ended. How, I want you to kind of get from those perspectives, if I may, to really educate us from your vintage position. What are we not seeing from the perspective of our brothers and sisters, I will call from La République? And how can we then use that we are not seeing in order to better either make a case or fight this war so our people understand what our enemy is really all about.
Yeah, I did not want to be too complex in my own analysis or presentation of the facts, but it is clear, I think, that in 1961, Southern Cameroons, except Northern Cameroons, moved not only into Cameroon, like British Cameroon, it also moved into what was back then the Central African imprint of France. And that imprint has a history, because you may have to remember that France has two imprints in Africa. One is West Africa, Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal being the centers, and you have economic consequences, you have military consequences, etc. But I'm only going to talk about the Central African part of it, where you also have financial, the CFA, its own currency, etc., etc. But the military aspect is, I think, the most important. Because that part of the world was organized in 1940. So you have to understand that from 1940, the center of that world was Chad. So militarily, it is under the command of Chad. As a consequence, any military action will be decided, from the French point of view, will be decided from Chad. And that's why, if you follow my page, from 2018, one of my questions was always, soldiers from Chad mobilized in Cameroon, in Ambazonia, are they mobilized already? Because, since 1940, they have always been mobilized, 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970. It will be, in 2014, of course, and it will be a surprise if they will not be mobilized in 2017, because the continuity is so rapid, it's so clear that Idriss Déby actually came to Cameroon. He did not even need to meet Biya, because the continuity is there. He knows that it is part of his territory. He will be engaged, of course, in the Central African Republic, and as an exception, he was engaged in Mali. What I'm trying to say there here is that less than France itself for Central Africa, because Central Africa tends to be quite secure for France. You have long-serving dictators there, etc. Less than France intervening like it did in Cote d'Ivoire or in Mali. It is Chad that does the intervention for France. So that was my fear, but then it was alleviated a little bit. Some soldiers on the ground told me that soldiers from Chad are in Bamenda, are in Bafoussam, etc. But then, I don't know if it was noise only. It didn't, it did not blossom. So what I will say is that is one school of thought, which is, militarily. And militarily, this is a clear case. And I tend to see that in Ambazonian readings of the case, you never mention it, actually. You never mention the fact that in 1961, you entered not only in a relationship with La République du Cameroun, you actually entered into a relationship with a second leg of the French Empire, of which Cameroon was a part. So, and that has consequences, that immediate, consequence, because Cameroon is not the leading, military power there, it is Chad. So regarding, the financial aspect, neocolonialism and, the involvement of France in the fight, for instance, in the western part of Cameroon, personally, I think it is less important. I think it is less important. I think if you get independence, it's going to solve itself. But the clarity of a goal is necessary from the very beginning. What is worrisome for me is the lack of analysis from the Ambazonian side, lack of analysis of the fact that you did not enter into a partnership with La République du Cameroun only. You really literally entered automatically in a partnership with a second leg of the French Empire, which is, Central Africa. And it has its own dynamic, it has its own history, its own relationships, etc., etc. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I was struggling with that, actually. Prof, it's a pleasure to meet up with you today virtually, and I do appreciate your time invested in humanity to sympathize with us. You've spoken by and large, and my major concern with what is going on within the territory of Cameroon has to do with the actual situation. The question I have got has to do with engaging the international system that is behind La République being able to sustain this system which they have, which is to assimilate the Southern Cameroonians. We know that besides France, there should be other parties that are responsible for Cameroon sustaining financially. Is there a way that we could identify these institutions or countries or bodies that continues to pump in money to give La République the ability to sustain and then continue killing us with the hope to achieve what they think is achievable?
Yeah, Prof. Nganang, thank you very much for availing yourself to us today. And as everybody here will say, we follow you. I don't know whether the French or the English translation is the best, or the, what the Francophones or what the French people see. We have been fighting for, or they have been killing us for more than 4 years now, and the French Cameroonians seem to be non-sympathetic, and we all know how many houses have been burned, how many people have been killed, and nobody, or they don't seem to care. But they started talking when 15 of their soldiers were shown on TV or on social media after the event in the northern zone. Now, would they have started talking earlier? I know we still say, oh, we are fighting a system and not the people, but would they have started talking earlier, or would they have their mentality or their desire to talk, would it have changed if we too were killing them, irrespective of whether they are soldiers or not? Because they are not only killing the voices in the bushes, they are killing baby Matters and baby Caroline. Would that have changed? I know you may not be a military strategist, but what would the international community think? And if it were you, what would you think?
So welcome, Prof. Ghana. Happy to have you on board. I have two questions. I'm sure you're already going to guess the direction in which I'm taking. When it comes to you, you are a humanitarian, I am a humanitarian. I probably have never said this before, but you played a very big role during your trip to Lowell. Remember, it started in Delaware, Philadelphia, then to Lowell.
Yes.
And the role you played was, you gave me a lot of courage. I don't know if you remember, but you were the one saying, tell the people what it is. Tell the people what the refugees are going through. It was just after the abduction of our leaders. And you said, tell the people, tell them what it is. Now, my question to you is, given the millions of IDPs, hundreds of thousands of refugees that we have, what is it that you can recommend? Given that you know a lot of people, let me say the Francophones, who probably do not want us, may not want us to have our Ambazonia, but do sympathize with the suffering of the people. What would you recommend? How do we approach these people? How do we get them to sympathize with those that are suffering by no fault of theirs? How do we get to them? Second question. Second question. You did promise we will go to Nigeria. When is that going to be? You don't need to respond that one here, but I'm just reminding you of it as a humanitarian.
Thank you. Thank you, Comrade Elena. So, Prof, let's take one more question and then you would answer. Comrade Celestine, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morito, and thank you, Prof. Ghana, for this great presentation, and we are really opportune to have you among us. And I actually have two basic questions. Elena covered part of it, and it's about the refugee issues, because we have a problem taking care of them. They have a lot of medical challenges and feeding and housing and even social problems that they encounter where they have been accepted to settle. So it's not our responsibility as Ambazonians to take care of these people, not the government of Nigeria, but the issue of the United Nations. And why, and just in line, what should we do? Because the settlers, they have been writing a lot of letters, attending many, United Nations are there, but they still don't heed to these people's plights on daily issues. Some are really, it's a disaster there. That is one of my questions, because maybe you can have a way that you can advise the people living there or us in the diaspora how to handle the humanitarian issue of our refugees around the borders of Southern Cameroon. My second question goes on education. You said in your presentation, you've been to University of Buea, and before they have refused the speaking of Pidgin as a language, now they have been accepting that, which identify to the culture of the Ambazonians. And it has been a couple of months that some renovations have been carried out in the English universities. And these are some of the issues that came up. But we, I think 2 months towards summer holiday or so, some of these reforms have been transferred. And those who are heading that to Yaoundé, I want to ask if it's something, we don't know how long this crisis is going to take, if the students then have to benefit to those reforms that they fought so hard to be given to their universities in the English side. Are they not supposed to be those to manage those structures, those institutions that are being granted in the whole of Cameroon that are English speaking? So those are my two areas of question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I think I'm simply going to go step by step, starting with Festus. You know, it is the question of genocide and war is, I think, settled. Genocide is a consequence of war. So it is it is, you go from war and then you have genocide, because in general, you don't have genocide without war. It is a state that commits genocide against a population that's not armed, that cannot defend itself. And so the state has the arm and declares war on a population that cannot defend itself and then commits a genocide, or a state is losing a war and then acts out on the population and commits a genocide, etc. So you have many scenarios, but you need to have a situation of war in the first place. In the case of Cameroon, whatever the case, one will always have to come back to November the 30th, 2017, Bia's declaration of war. That's where you will start. Of course, you know, the state will argue and say that it wasn't a declaration of war, and it can make sense to a certain extent, but that's where you have to start, because a war is an escalation of a situation that starts randomly. You know, World War II started with taking over of a post office. World War I started with you know, the murder of you know, a prince, and that's where it starts. So it is the process that defines the war as well, but the declaration is clearly set there. The other thing is that you know, genocide is also a moral argument. It is the moral argument for Ambazonians to be able to pick up arms, to be able to be heard, to be, you know, arms in terms of self-defense, to be able to organize, to be able to be heard, to be able to have a legitimacy, an international legitimacy to, for the state to come. So without genocide, you will not be able to even say that you want to have a state. You will not be able to say to somebody next door, you know, to your village, why you need a state, because then the person will say, why? Will say, we're being killed by the people of the other state. So we need our own, because we'll take care of our business better than under La République. So genocide is therefore a moral argument. And so if there are some, you know, I mean, there are a couple of countries that are willing. You have Germany, for instance. Germany is a willing partner. And I'm not going to insist so much on Switzerland, because Switzerland has been beaten up so much. But I think Germany being a former colonizing power in Cameroon, and actually being the country that brought us together has lots of saying in that matter. So I think Germany will be number 2. I'm not, one can say England will be questionable since France is questionable as well. But Germany has always been willing. And I think the Germans will have a listening ear in that, in those matters. Let's not forget that Germany is having a new chancellor as well, and France is likely to have a new president. So it is, it is interesting. It also happens that a Cameroonian from Douala has been, voted into the German parliament. So I don't know what role, what ear, what capacity he can have to listen to what is happening on the ground in his country of origin. But these are types of things that are happening for, the next year, for, not essentially this year, because it is, we have November, December, but probably for January, February. So there are possibilities there. You need to consider those possibilities carefully. Now, regarding the Francophones, I am a student of victory. I think victory is the best teacher. And victory is what makes you have friends. And nobody wants to have somebody who is losing. So you just can have no pity. Look, the bottom line is that no pity killed 15 people. But no pity is very much loved, because people understand that he won. So people like somebody who wins. If you win a battle, you will have all friends. If one wakes up one morning and hears that Bali has fallen, that, you have battles, etc. One hears that, a city like Bali, Bali, falling means that you overtake the administration, etc., which I'm not sure you want to do for now. If you wake up and you hear, people hear that Kumbo has fallen, and, those kinds of news, it changes, people's opinion automatically. This one hears that Bamenda has fallen. And so it means now people have been set in a mind, in a road, in a path to victory. And that is the best teacher. I'm not sure you need to waste time trying to find friends amongst Francophone. I don't spend my time doing that. I think, the best teacher is victory. And, the more victories you have, the more friends you will necessarily have, because people will come your way. And of course, suffering makes you have friends as well, but not as much as victory. And so that for me is the best teacher. It was my answer to Itasi there. Now, who are you, who amongst the Francophones, who are you going to kill, just to put it bluntly? Honestly, these last weeks made it clear, made 2 things clear. The first is that, and I'm going to be blunt here, if you kill a Bulu officer, you have a victory. You rock the state. You are at the heart of the matter. But if you kill somebody from the north, a Bamileke man or so, you are really wasting your time, because they are not warring parties. Everybody understands. You come back to the map I had before, that who are the fighting forces. Everybody understands that it is a random killing, even if it is a soldier. You have a Bamileke officer who has been arrested. People will say, come on, arrest 20, and it's not going to move anything. You have a Northeast officer who is arrested in Ambazonia. It brings nothing really. You have a Bassa officer who is arrested or killed. It's a waste of energy. But if you arrest or you kill somebody from Bululand, from San Melima, from Akonolinga, I don't know, Ibolova, there you've rocked the state. And if you move along those lines, you are moving on the path to victory, because then you are not wasting your bullets, you are not wasting your time, you're not wasting your energy. You're actually doing something substantial. So I just want to say that I've noticed in general that Southern Cameroonians and Ambazonians tend not to look at the sociology of Francophones, tend not to look at the alliances that Francophones have amongst each other or to power. And so you have to go for the center. You don't have to go for the periphery. So don't lose, it's like you are at the war now, you arrest somebody from where, I don't know, somebody from Gaundere. Really, it's a waste of time. Just let that, person free. At the moment, Nopiti's victory was based on the fact that he killed an officer whose name is Mba Itunji. He vanquished him, and he vanquished his whole battalion. It rocked the Republic, and that is how people started listening. It is not specifically because 15 people died. It is because the head of the matter was an Etunji. That is the reason. That is the fundamental reason. So I want to answer it very clearly that you have to know your enemy, because then as a consequence, you will shorten the battle, you will shorten the war. You will even shorten the number of people killed, arrested, maimed, etc. So you have to know exactly who your enemy is. I mean, if you even read any military tract, book, etc., they will always say exactly that. You have to know your enemy. So that's what that one will be my answer here. So about refugees, starting with when we'll do that trip. Of course, I mean, during these last 2 years were kind of, no year is wasted, but I was so invested in campaigning for something else that would not have been possible for me to even imagine moving away from it, because I had a team, we had 20 years, so I had to micromanage everything for a full year, a TV station, all that. So I'm coming back on track, just for you to know. I am coming back on track. And so that is the first issue on my table, really, because I actually have money for them. And so yeah, of course, because remember I had a book that I published and the goal was actually to help refugees. So I always suspected, the state of refugees is not something that is fleeting. It's not solved in a day or two. And the politics of refugees is so large and so long. And also refugees are, let's face it again, are a weapon in a war. So one has to have a clarity of in that, which is to say, if, for instance, the government, the Ambazonian government or anybody in the leadership is spending too much money on refugees, as a consequence, it is helping state agencies to survive. And it is not defending itself or defending Ambazonians against the enemy. So one has to choose when the funds are not that high. One has to choose where to invest one's energy or one's funds. So what is to recommend that is exactly that, to be smart about how you invest your energy, because at the end of the day, you want to win. So you want to win the war, you want to be independent. If you're independent, when you're independent, and the moment you are, all refugees come back home. So it is a solution there. So when you win, you have solved the refugee case. But if you lose, you have created more refugees. So then you have to invest your time and energy on winning. And the example of Zimbabwe is there, certainly of Tanzania, of all those places. You just have to learn from them, and you'll realize that that winning is, the best master. So whose responsibility is it? I think I actually gave an answer to that. There's one, you have so many state agencies that already take care of refugees. From the UN or even to Nigeria, to neighbors, to families. Let's not forget the internally displaced. In Francophone Cameroon, you remember I did build a school there in Yaoundé for Anglophone kids, and it blossomed from, the 400 kids that were going to there. Now it's 800. So it means it is endless. I'm actually very much afraid. So whose responsibility is that? I think, first of all, state agencies, first of all, and because you don't want to remove your eye from winning. You really do not want to do that. That's my own clear-cut analysis here. So the Ambazonian leadership, I will say, will be strengthened in strengthening the fight to win. And that is issue number one in my case. Strengthening the fight to win, and refugees is going to be issue number two. So fight to win is number one, always. Because when you win, refugees have a country and they come back to. And all of us have a country, because we are all refugees anyway now. So they will have a country to go back to.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. We have Comrade Fru Kimbang, hands up, and then we have Struggle Collins. Fru, go ahead with your question for Professor Nganang.
Thank you, moderator, and thanks everybody listening, and especially thank you, Comrade Nganang. I would say that we should not waste our time. As a proud Ambazonia, we should not waste our time that we are educating Francophones. They spend the whole time trying to destroy us and also brainwashing us to be like them. And that is why we are acting the way we are acting. So we should not waste time. So first, and another thing is that, Comrade Nganang, thank you very much for your last question. I think you answered the question, what would the international community do to us, and why should we be going to the international community and the UN? If you listen, if we are very conscious about our own identity, I think the first thing that we have done is to identify who we are. We are Ambazonians. That's a big victory right there. You have to take hold and be proud of who you are. Then someone else can now respect you. And I will comment later. And then secondly, if you listen to Matthew Rosselli, this is a guy who lost a lucrative job at the UN. He said, briefly, don't waste your time with the UN. The UN goes to a place when the people have grabbed power and grabbed land and in control. They go there to negotiate with the people on the ground. They don't go there to bring peace. So I think Comrade Nganang has mentioned it. When we focus our attention and grab our territory, that is victory. And victory only multiplies. So the question is, what are we doing to ourselves to be able to do that for ourselves? Because once we start grabbing our territory, as we have, the international community reluctantly did not want to acknowledge our identity by Ambazonians, we force it on them. And some of us are reluctant even to do that. While La République has been pushing that we are Southern Cameroon, because they confuse us for their southern part of Cameroon. And we, I'm sorry for the language, foolishly and stupidly go with that promotion. So the most important thing that I want to ask my comrade in arms, Professor Nganang, is, please, what would you tell the Francophones in French? Because you are talking to us. We know our problem. We know how we'll solve it. And the problem is happening because the generation that grew up from 1972 till now, they are more Francophone. They don't even know who we are. They are, that's why we are who we are. Because La République's intention was to brainwash us to start thinking like them and forget our own values. And that is where we are. We spend more time fighting amongst ourselves than grabbing our land and knowing who we are. So the only request that I will ask Comrade Nganang is, please speak in French to the Francophones right now. They are the ones you should talk to, because we know what we will do. And my granddaughter has ignited the power in us to know that this game, it was a game, but now we are in for it. And every Ambazonian, when you see what happened to my granddaughter on the streets in Boya, you should be able to take this seriously. We don't need to educate the Francophones. We need to educate ourselves and take our land, and the international community will come in when we start saying that Bamenda Airport is in our control. Boya is in our control. Mbengwi is in our control. That's when you see the UN knowing that they are going to come in and deal with us. Let us not be dancing around and talking about international community. They are business people. Brother, talk to our brothers on the east side of the Mongo. Please, if you can just say something, address them, not in English, but in their tongue, so that they can understand. Thank you.